open my eyes, I see it clear. And when I open my eyes, who should I fear? 'Cause the nights are getting brighter and the days are getting shorter. If it all goes away, we'll still be here. If it all goes up in flames, we'll still be here.
The shadow of the Earth moving across the face of the moon has been seen by man since he first walked the planet. The darkening of the moon brings wonder, worship, fear, and fascination. The most wondrous and mysterious of all lunar phenomena is the rare occurrence when the moon is full and the shadow of the Earth is perfectly aligned and the moon is turned to the color of blood.
So imagine you're an astronomer or a space traveler and you land on the face of the moon and you look back to the Earth during one of these eclipses. What you'll see is a giant ring of fire. You'll see every sunrise and every sunset on the Earth all at the same time. And that reddish light, sunsets and sunrises look very red, pass through the atmosphere and fall onto the face of the moon. So you get that dim red blood color.
Only 4 times in the last 500 years have there been 4 blood moons, appearing back to back, coinciding with Jewish high holy days. The 4th series of blood moons is upon us.
A tetrad is a scientific term that NASA uses, and what it refers to is when you have 4 total lunar eclipses in a row, back to back.
The thing that compelled me to write The 4 Blood Moons was when I discovered the scientific fact NASA was putting out. That it happened in 1493, that it happened in 1949, that it happened in 1967, and was going to happen in 2015.
The Talmud states clearly that the eclipse of the sun is difficult for the nations of the world. The eclipse of the moon is difficult for the Jewish people and express a difficulty for the Jewish people.
When I saw 1493 and 1949 and 1967, knowing history, I knew that these 3 dates applied to Israel and or the Jewish people.
It is interesting to correlate historical events with the timing of the tetrads. Over the past 500 years, each of them coincides with a significant event. The fact that these significant events have to do with Israel is an interesting coincidence. Because of Israel's unique place in the world, some believe the juxtaposition of blood moons and significant historical events may be something more than random, a foreshadowing, a time of significant change.
And of course, Joel and his prophecy is so specific about the blood moon being the beginning of the ultimate redemption. And so, of course, the notion that the heavenly bodies serve as signs is very much part of Jewish thought and Jewish theology, and rooted in the Bible.
David said, the heavens declare the glory of the Lord, that the heavens give to men reason and thought. When I read that verse in the 19th chapter, I knew that God was communicating to earth by the heavens.
There's an amazing midrash, rabbinical statement, in the mystical interpretations of the Bible as well as in the rabbinical interpretations, that the Jewish people are compared to the moon. And the moon goes through cycles. And it looks at a certain point as if the moon has completely disappeared. But it will never completely disappear. From that disappearance, it will be born again. And it will emerge again. And become even stronger than it was before.
He created the sun and the moon, and the stars for signs. And when you read the book of Isaiah, you read the book of Joel, you read the Gospels, you read Acts, you read Revelation, everywhere it says the sun will turn to sackcloth, the moon to blood. Even in Luke, The Lord says there will be signs in the sun and the moon.
I never debunk these signs. I never do. Again, I see the larger picture. That's what I'm more naturally predisposed to being preoccupied with. But I find these things very suggestive. And why wouldn't God send signs? There would be no reason not to.
What we notice in science is the more you research the record of nature, the more evidences you find for the handiwork of God. And so it's not a surprise that we're seeing an increasing number of scientists looking at that evidence.
There are plenty of believers in the science community, and so, but we try to stick to that which can be explained from the laws of physics that we understand. And so that's kind of the basis of our conversations.
There are many people who do not believe in Bible prophecy at all because they simply don't understand it. But they do accept scientific fact, and they do accept historical fact. So when you take scientific fact and historical fact and line it up exactly with prophetic fact, and they all are in perfect agreement, now it's time to put doubt aside and to believe that God is trying to communicate to us in a very special way, and we need to talk about this because something is about to change.
Are you guys familiar with the blood moon?
Yeah, we've heard about it.
Yeah, did you guys get to see it in October?
Yes. Yes, I've heard of blood moon before. Did we just have one recently?
The only moon I know about is the Comanche moon. And that's when the full moon was up and the Comanches would ride and raid and cause a lot of blood to flow.
Have you ever heard of a blood moon?
Oh yeah, it's biblical.
To be honest with you, I'm just too busy being a mom and raising my kids and taking care of my household. I don't have time to really think deeply about it.
Do you think that there's any connection between all these astronomical events that are happening and something that's going on with Israel?
Unfortunately, being in uniform, I can't answer my full opinion, but yes, I do. I really do.
Space is a miracle. Just the world being here is a miracle. We live in a miracle.
For me, I think it could be depends which side of the fence you look at it. So if you think of it as a spiritual thing, yes, you can see the relation. If you don't, then it could be circumstantial, and it's just a sort of a chance that it's all happening.
I think I read about it in the Bible somewhere, about the moon turning red or something, but I mean, maybe that's pollution.
People interpret the cosmic events of the heavens in many different ways. Some are concerned and some don't care. Scientists call a phenomenon of four blood moons a tetrad. Historians call it a coincidence. Some biblical scholars call the tetrad of blood moons a sign from God. Are the strange sequences of tetrad blood moons an astronomical phenomenon or a sign in the heavens? Is there a correlation between the movement of planets, prophecy, and the history of our world? We are going to look at this rare phenomenon at the intersection of science, history, and scripture. Facts, tradition, and opinion collide in controversy, mystery, and wonder. Is something about to change? And if so, what is it? And how shall we know it? The first tetrad of the blood moons in our story was 1493. The blood moon appeared as the most famous ship's captain in the world, set sail on his second voyage to the New World.
My family and I were among hundreds of Jews who escaped the horrors of the Spanish Inquisition. We left Spain on the 24th day of September in the year 1493. The terror we had endured since the Edict of Expulsion would forever darken our dreams. They hated us. Queen Isabella banished every Jew who refused to convert to the Catholic Church.
¿Tú eres judío?
No, Abraham. Yo soy católico. Bendito sea el santo nombre de la Madre de Dios.
El carnicero informa que solo compras pollo. ¿No comes carne de cerdo?
Tomas de Torquemada was a Jew who feigned conversion to the Holy Catholic Church to find favor with the Queen.
Tu marido
Jews who converted to save their lives were dragged before the Inquisition on the slightest suspicion.
No. No.
He tortured other Jews who claimed conversion to make us confess we embraced our beloved Judaism in secret. I am ashamed to admit that I claimed conversion to Christianity to escape exile or death.
Bueno. Vamos a averiguar.
But I was to be tortured anyway to make me confess it was a lie and that I remained a Jew.
No.
Creo que es la niña. Hola. Vengan a conocer al capitán. Almirante Colón. Le presento a mis amigos.
It was a great honor to meet the famous Captain General Colón. He surprised me with his kindness. I shall never forget the feeling. In his care we will be free.
Qué lindo.
Our sweet child gave our captain the last vestige of our persecution. The loathsome yellow star they made us wear. Never again.
Su familia están bienvenidos. Muchas gracias.
As we prepared to set sail to a new world and a new life, our hearts were filled with hope and thanks to God. But the terrors and the tortures we endured to save our lives and preserve our precious faith would never be forgotten.
¿Eres judío? No. ¿Eres cristiano o eres judío? ¡Soy católico!
They subjected us to reprehensible tortures to force us to confess that in our hearts we were still Jews.
Dilo ahora. Habla. A ver,
It was not about finding the truth. It was about expelling Jews or killing them.
Dímelo ahora, no te quedes callado.
By some miracle, I withstood the purging and survived. Those less fortunate were left to die.
Gracias por su ayuda. Buena suerte. Buen viaje.
We had a chance to meet the men who financed the voyages of the Captain General Colón. It was not the Catholic Queen Isabella as most believed. It was these Jewish men, Rabbi Isaac Abravanel, Luis de Santangel, and Gabriel Sanchez. The New World is not the ancient homeland God gave to our fathers, but for us it will surely be a promised land.
Our Lord unlocked my mind, sent me upon the sea, and gave me fire for the deed. I could feel his hand upon me. Those who heard of my enterprise called it foolish. They ridiculed me and laughed. But who can doubt that the Holy Ghost inspired me?
The day we left, the moon was full and darkened by a total eclipse. Then suddenly, it turned to the color of blood. It was as if God marked the day with a sign in the heavens, lest we ever forget.
I do know he had inclinations. I do know there are some who track him back to actually having Jewish blood and Jewish heritage himself, and attribute that as the reason that he was very favorable to the Jews at a time when the world was not very favorable to the Jews.
His name was Cristobal Colon, his Italian name. And Colon is a Hebrew Kohanic Jewish priestly name. That's what makes a lot of people feel that he was definitely Jewish.
Columbus today has become a great villain. And that's because people do not know who he was originally, and they reflect what they've been told today about Columbus. And when you go back to his document, he wrote so much. This is Columbus's Book of Prophecies, and this is what was done 500 years ago, and you see it in his own writing, and this is what he himself wrote down and talked about.
For the Jews in particular who were persecuted in Spain, America was a place to run to, and America was a place to make a new kind of life. And it's remarkable that Jews came to the Americas from the beginning and played a critical role in the formation and the development of America.
The first Thanksgiving was celebrated in 1621, a year after the Mayflower landed. It was inspired in part by Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. It was to be a day of fasting, introspection, and prayer. History has failed to remember the significant influence of the Jews in the founding of America.
I don't believe in coincidences, especially when it comes to Israel and the Jewish people and God's hand being involved with his people.
When George Washington and the Revolutionary Army had run out of food, arms, munition, clothing, Chaim Solomon went to the Jewish community in America and in Europe, raised millions of dollars, and gave it to George Washington and the Revolutionary Army, and they were able to continue the fight, and they won the battle because a Jewish banker made that possible. He's the forgotten man in history, but I assure you that that battle would have been lost and freedom in America would never have happened without the Jewish contribution in our early history.
May Mr. Solomon and the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in the land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid.
I love what John Adams said. I'm just going to read a quote from John Adams. This is right at Adams' writings. He said, "I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize man than any other nation. They preserve and propagate to all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of all civilization."
Almost all of the founding fathers of the United States were what was called restorationists. They believed that the Jewish people should be restored to their homeland.
Our founding fathers, both Ben Franklin as well as Thomas Jefferson, each, when they had to come up with a national symbol or a national motto, they came up with symbols and mottos that referred back to the ancient Israelites.
Every person who ever lived has stared into the night sky, pondering the mysteries of life and death, the vastness of space, and wondered.
Well, I look at the universe as something which just works like a wound-up clock. We understand the laws of physics, and as astronomers, we spent an awful lot of time learning how to predict these sorts of things. And the laws of nature are fairly well understood, I think, by humans. And so we're pretty good at understanding how these things work. And they work simply because the laws of physics are the way that they are. And so we don't see anything particularly special about them, but it's kind of a triumph of the human intellect that we can understand these things at all.
The Bible stood alone until the 20th century in making the claim that the universe continuously expands from the cosmic creation event. We can now prove that that is true, showing that the Bible not only has predictive power with human history, it has predictive power with scientific discoveries. And now that we can measure the factors governing this fine-tuning, there we find the most spectacular scientific evidence for supernatural, superintelligent design. We can actually measure the level of design in the parameters that govern the expansion, and it tells us that the causal agent beyond space and time at a minimum is 10 trillion times more intelligent, more knowledgeable, and better funded than us human beings. Therefore, it's not just a transcendent creator, it's a personal creator.
All of us at some time pondered the meaning of life, where we come from, why we're here, what happens when we die, and how we fit into the grand scheme of the universe. Some stare into the blackened void and find no meaning. Others search the heavens to unravel the mysteries of the cosmos. Many look for signs and messages from God.
And it's through my astronomy research I realized there had to be a beginning to the universe, and therefore there had to be a God. And I spent 2 years researching the holy books of religions of the world and recognized that the Bible alone was an accurate revelation from the one that actually created the universe.
The Bible says in Genesis 1:14 that I have set the sun, the moon, and the stars for signs and seasons. The word signs in Hebrew also can mean signals, that God is sending us a signal.
When we look up into the sky and we see something that wasn't there before, strange feelings can happen.
History leaves little doubt that there have been signs in the heavens, signs that people of Earth have interpreted as sent by a power greater than ourselves. The Bible records one of the most startling signs ever given.
Well, I don't think there's any question that God uses signs and wonders to speak to his people. And look, that's how he led the Magi to the baby Jesus. And I think that's more than just a fairy tale. I think that's exactly how they found Christ in that manger in Bethlehem.
The book of Ezekiel speaks about the rebirth of Israel as a nation in the land of promise, and also prophesies that when the nation is formed, the Israelis will not possess the ancient high places of worship. In the 67 war, they captured all the ancient high places of worship.
Israel still stands by the sovereign hand of God and will until the last day the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. When the last battle has been fought, the last bullet has been fired, the flag of Israel is going to be flying over the ancient walls of the holy city, and Jerusalem will stand forever.
The story of Israel begins with Abraham, the great father of many nations. It begins with a covenant of priesthood, posterity, and possession of a land that to this very day remains in conflict. The Jewish people survived 2,000 years of exile and persistent persecutions. They survived the horrors of Nazi Germany. They rose from the ashes of World War II like the mystical phoenix of ancient Greek mythology. Israel was reborn after 1,900 years of exile. Its first permanent government was established in 1949. The nation of Israel came into being in the crimson glow of a tetrad of blood moons that fell on Jewish holy days, the second in 500 years.
It wasn't the Holocaust that created the state of Israel. It's 3,000 years of Jewish history that goes back to the founding of the state when King David made Jerusalem its capital, but even earlier to when Abraham came there and met the king of Shalem and saw this place, the city of Jerusalem. From the time of the temples to the current time, Jews never turned their backs on Jerusalem. Jews always prayed toward Jerusalem and yearned for the return, to the return not out of terror and not because of prejudice and persecution, but Yerushalayim Ircha Barachimim Tashuv, we pray that we return with God's mercy and blessing.
Has to be remembered that we lived in this area for 2,000 years until the destruction of the temple, the second temple, in the year 70 of the Common Era. And even though we were then pushed, exiled from pillar to post, there was always in an unbroken chain Jews who lived in the area for the full 4,000 years of Jewish history.
The seeds of Zionism were planted by Theodor Herzl in the closing years of the 19th century. A Jewish chemist by the name of Chaim Weizmann created the synthetic gunpowder that enabled England to defeat Germany in World War I. A grateful queen asked Weizmann, how could they repay him? Weizmann's answer changed the world. Give the Jews a homeland. The Balfour Declaration fulfilled God's promise to Israel made 4,000 years earlier and recorded in both the Bible and the Talmud. The Jews had a homeland at last. The United Nations recognized the nation of Israel on November 29, 1947. It is significant that the United States was the first nation to recognize the new state of Israel.
It was an American president, Harry Truman, that was the first to recognize the new nation of Israel. He did that even though almost every one of his major political advisors urged him not to. Several of them said they would resign if he did it.
Harry Truman was probably the strongest supporter of Israel that America's ever had, and he was supportive in spite of the objections of almost everybody in his cabinet.
Harry Truman told his advisors he wanted 3 days to think about whether or not the United States would support Israel's intention to declare independence. He went into seclusion. What he did during those 3 days would not be known for 50 years.
Harry Truman, when handed the document that notified him that Israel had declared sovereignty, took his pen and actually marked out the new Jewish state and wrote the state of Israel.
We know now what he did during those 3 days. He read the Bible. And in his reading of the Bible, he read about Cyrus, the king of Persia, who allowed the Jews, after the destruction of the first temple, to return to Judea in 536 BCE. And Cyrus is one of the great heroes of the Bible for giving the Jews the right to return to Judea and to rebuild the Holy Temple.
Harry Truman is a very religious-minded president. Harry Truman, if you want fun at Christmas time, read the presidential messages of Harry Truman to the nation about Christmas. Is stronger than any preacher I've ever seen in the United States.
President Truman writes in his memoirs, I wanted to be the second Cyrus. I want to go down in history as the president who allowed the Jews to return to their homeland after 2,000 years of wandering.
But he had been to Sunday school and he had read his Bible, and he knew that there was an imperative for America to be a supporter of Israel, and that hasn't changed.
Without the existence of the United States, without Truman's decree, Israel may not have been reborn as a nation. And after 1948, to the modern day, the U.S. has been Israel's strongest ally, strongest supporter. We are bonded by our shared democracy, our shared Judeo-Christian values, our shared Bible. It's a special, special relationship, and I believe God has blessed America because we have blessed Israel. And if that changes, we're in big trouble.
On May 14, 1948, Israel proclaimed its independence. Less than 24 hours later, the armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded the country.
Stop and think about the fact that in 1948, within an hour after they declared sovereignty, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 14th of May, 1948, they were at war. This was a brand new nation, an hour old, was at war. They were attacked from every direction by Muslim nations, Muslim entities that wanted to destroy them, and they were victorious. That it can be described as nothing but a miracle.
It was foretold in the Bible that Israel would be recreated as a state. And I think it is it's remarkable that that biblical prophecy, which is about as clear as any of the prophecies in the Bible, can be verified by us today. And would actually have been merely speculative before 1948. But after 1948, we can say that the Bible predicted it, and it happened.
My basic belief of the Jews is that they are the chosen people. And I don't even believe this for theological reasons. I believe this for rational reasons. There's no other way to explain Jewish history. None. There are over 200 countries in the world. Only one is targeted by enemies for extinction. There is no attempt to eradicate any other state on earth, no matter what it has done. Nobody wants to eradicate anything. Everyone's at peace with Honduras. Everybody's at peace with Paraguay, with Burma. People who hate it. Nobody wants to eradicate them. Now, it's very interesting because, ironically, coincidentally, the one state that is targeted for extinction is the one Jewish state. Now, is that coincidence? Of course it's not a coincidence. It can't be a coincidence. And it makes sense to me.
Before the ink was dry on the Declaration of Independence, Palestinian Arabs launched an air attack on Tel Aviv. As the fighting intensified, other Arab forces joined the Palestinians. Within 6 weeks, Israeli Defense Forces seized control of lands granted them by the United Nations. Almost immediately, Israel was attacked in a brutal simultaneous coordinated assault by 5 regular Arab armies with an overwhelming superiority of equipment, armor, artillery, and air force. In what became known as Israel's War of Independence, the newly formed, poorly equipped Israeli Defense Forces repulsed the invaders in fierce intermittent fighting, which lasted 15 months. 6,000 Jews were killed, but in the end, Israel ejected the invading Arab forces and captured 5,000 square kilometers beyond the areas allocated to it by the United Nations. It was only in the final phases that the Haganah, Israeli Defense Forces, bold initiatives, and the unexpected help of pilots from America that changed the course of the war.
I was in North Dakota selling used cars when I got the call. Bring your leather jacket and proof you can fly, my Air Force buddy said. Israel was being attacked by 5 Arab armies with no way to defend themselves. They purchased a hodgepodge of planes left over from the war. We flew the old planes into Israel at night, reassembled them from spare parts, and hoped we could make them fly. I was a fighter pilot for the U.S. Navy. The word that Jews were going to fight to keep their new nation was a call for help I couldn't ignore.
What's up with Messerschmitt? You think it'll work?
أبطال ركزوا معايا جدا في خطة النهاردة. الأهداف متحددة بعناية بس التنفيذ لازم يبقى بالظبط. هم عندهم دفاعات أرضية بس ما عندهمش طيران، عشان كده خطتنا هتتنفذ بسهولة.
The Arabs had squadrons of planes and the myriad machines of war. They were a superior force in every way, preparing to bomb Israel into oblivion.
احنا لو عملنا الكلام ده كله هيبقى تمام. فهمتوني؟ لو كل واحد عمل الخطة النتائج هتبقى رائعة. والله ما هيعرفوا يمسكوه. نفذوا الخطة بالظبط وسيبوا بقى.
يا فندم تعال بص ده بسرعة.
They laughed that Israel had no air force. I'd like to have been there when they found out they were wrong. Very, very wrong.
بسرعة بسرعة تعالوا الواحد على مكانه الواحد على مكانه الحقوا ننزلوا السيارات بسرعة قبل ما تتقطع يا يقتلونا يا نقتلهم ما عندناش وقت. معقولة اليهود عندهم طيارات اليهود عندهم طيارات.
Nothing that could have kept me from being there and doing what had to be done. I was born to be in that moment of history.
These pilots and other courageous volunteers who came to help were the most important contribution to the survival of the State of Israel. David Ben-Gurion called them the fingers of God. The armistice was signed on July 20th, 1949.
You carried me over the storm that I thought I could never face, and in my darkest hour it was there I found your grace, and you have been the wind to my sails, even through all of my mistakes, and even when I don't see you there, I'll keep the faith. I feel you in the morning. I know you're here tonight. You never would ignore me. You love me, Lord, in spite of all in spite of all in spite of all
With the homeland secured at last and their enemies vanquished and defeated, the gathering began. The return of the Jews to Israel has been likened to the Exodus from Egypt. The gathering of the exiles to a God-given land became the central idea of the Zionist movement. The Megillat Ha'atzmaut, the idea of going up, of returning to the Holy Land that is higher spiritually than all other lands. The Jews were returning home. The miracle of Israel had only begun.
Who ever heard of such a thing? For a people to be scattered from their homeland to the ends of the earth for 2,000 years, gone. Then they return, reestablish their ancient homeland. If that's not proof of the existence of God, I don't know what is.
Many are the miracles of the time in which we live. The greatest is our return to Israel after 2,000 years of exile. Ranking next to that is the return of the exiles, the black Jews of Ethiopia, from the tribe of Dan. They've returned now to Israel. The dark Jews in India from the tribe of Manasseh. 6,000 of them.
We have returned after so many years to our sovereignty and to our language, biblical language. We speak the same language basically that they spoke 3,300 years ago, that as Joshua entered into Israel and to the conquest of Israel, and that we basically, it's the same God, the same religion.
David Ben-Gurion had declared the new nation a place of freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. That dream of Israel was not to be. With the creation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in 1964, Israel entered a period of high tension, sabotage, and terrorism. Egypt staged its army on Israel's border, blocked the Straits of Tirah, and drove the United Nations peacekeepers from the Sinai. Israel had no choice but to defend itself. The Israeli army raided the Jordanian-controlled West Bank, initiated flights over Syria, and took on the Egyptians in the Sinai. In 6 days, against insurmountable odds, the little nation of Israel held back and defeated the enormous firepower of 6 separate nations. An Israeli victory in a 6-day war was theoretically impossible. Things happened no one could explain, unless the victory is part of God's ancient promise to protect Israel and fight against her enemies. War historians were left scratching their heads.
But you can't teach the tactics or the strategy or the operations of the Israelis in a war college and make sense of it, because there's no reason they should have won other than divine intervention.
But the fact is, there have been many, many more missiles sent out and rockets sent out by the other side. They just didn't hit us. Somehow, they went on places where nobody was living. And that's a miracle to rival all of the miracles in the Bible in the book of Exodus about what happened to the Hebrews living in Egypt during the time of the 10 plagues. And it's very, very clear you have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to see God's protective hand.
Was it a victory wrought by miracles, or was it only a curious coincidence? The resounding defeat of their enemies came in the glow of 4 blood moons that fell on Jewish holy days. We found there is much more to the story of tiny Israel defeating 5 standing armies than is found in history books. There are hundreds of occurrences documented by UN observers. Some would even call them miraculous events.
I was a taxi driver before the war. But in Israel, we are all soldiers and willing. I was not very religious, but after what happened to us that day, how can I not say it was God who helped us?
אתה בסדר?
We've been on recon since early Friday. I was sick and hurting bad.
כן. רגע. לא, דקה.
We knew we had to make our way back to our unit. 2 of us wouldn't stand a chance if we ran into the Egyptians. Suddenly, there they were. There was nowhere to run, so we just stood there, like ducks in a gallery waiting to be shot. For lack of a better idea, we aimed our guns at them and shouted, and I can hardly explain what happened.
خلاص خلاص كف خلاص 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 يلا تريد
There's a slug!
مكتب
There's a slug! There were 18 armed soldiers in the back of the truck. I had a rifle with an almost empty clip. They trembled like men stricken by the palsy, begging me for mercy.
טוב, שימו לב. כאן וכאן. תיידעו את החיילים שלכם. ברור? כן, המפקד. בינתיים, תמתינו במידע מהסיום ותפתחו עיניים. מובן? מובן. כאן. המפקד! כן. מה זה? לא יאומן!
شكرا.
תודה.
When my heart finally stopped pounding, I asked the Egyptian, why didn't he call for his men to open fire?
إلا النار علينا. والله ما بعرف. إيدي جم. إيدي.
He said their arms were paralyzed. Paralyzed? I'm not sure I understand what happened, but how can I ever say it was not God who helped us?
بخاف من ربك.
The Egyptian said he feared our God, and I confessed, I fear him also.
Each soldier sees the war from his own perspective. There was a myriad of miracles on the battlefield, but also in the villages and the towns. For all of the incredible stories documented, there were many more preserved in the private stories told by the ones who were there, by the ones who were spared by events that cannot be explained.
I was 10 years old when the war came. My father had gone to fight. The last thing he said to me was that I was the man of our family while he was away. When the bombs began, we barely escaped. I ran with my mother and sister Lily, like Father had said. We were finally safe. At least, that's what I thought. The bomb did not explode. Baruch Hashem.
No. This is Subhanallah.
In the days and months that followed, I heard many stories like ours. We were not the only ones spared by the miraculous hand of God.
Any thinking person has to think about the intervention of God in the history of Israel. What rationale is there for Israel to exist today? This little country, a postage stamp, stood against 20 Arab countries sworn to its destruction, plus hundreds of millions of Muslims who were incited and activated to work against Israel's existence. And yet not only does it exist, it thrives.
There were only 4 Syrian fighters on the ridge, but 3 of our guys were hit and wounded bad. I figured if Yaakov and I could keep them pinned down until dark, we could slip away and get our guys to the medics. But nothing could have prepared us for what had happened. It was an entire company of Syrian infantry. We were nearly out of ammunition. We had no chance. For us, the war was over. We knew the Syrians did not take prisoners. Yaakov and I said goodbye, prayed for God to save Israel, and prepared to die.
Chaim Matim, Nichnim, Naim, Naim, Nik Naim.
Shalom.
Mahu.
Salam. Salam.
It was the Arabs who told UN observers they'd seen armies of angels. Those stories did not come from the Israeli soldiers, but they did understand. It was foretold.
His promise to us that our seed will never be destroyed, will return to Israel, and that through us will come the redemption. And that's a tremendously important thing. I believe it with all my heart, but you don't have to believe it. You know that Golda Meir said, to live in Israel and to believe in miracles means you're a realist. They happen all around you, and they've happened here. And it's not a question. I don't believe it. I know it. It's happening.
Ammunition Hill was the worst day of the war. There wasn't a plan. We were told to attack, to take back the city. It doesn't matter if you're from Poland or Yemen or America. Jerusalem is our common bond. Even as an Orthodox Jew, I can hardly explain the deep meaning it had for me to be involved in the fight for Jerusalem. Every day for my whole life, I had prayed 3 times to Jerusalem. As a child, I heard my parents say, "Next year in Jerusalem." I could never have imagined the mystical feeling of seeing the wall for the first time, gazing upon this last remnant of our holy temple, the incredible privilege of being among those who freed it from bondage, the wonder of being among the first to touch the holy stones and pour out thanks to God.
But the prophecy wasn't fulfilled until the 7th of June, 1967, when those paratroopers from the 55th Brigade went into that city, and they took that old city, and they came to the Temple Mount, and they blew the shofar, and they proclaimed, "This is our country. This is our city. This is our holy site, the Temple Mount, where Abraham offered up his son Isaac." You say there's not a sovereign God? There's not a God that watches over Israel? Look at the evidence.
Hegia Hazman, Ulitenu.
Look up with your eyes, redemption's near. Oh, haven't you realized that all the signs are clear? 'Cause the nights are getting brighter and the days are getting shorter. If it all goes away, you'll still be here. If it all goes up in flames, you'll still be here. So I'm not afraid to walk through the fire with you. No, I'm not afraid to walk through the fire with you.
We have returned to all that is holy in our land. We have returned never to be parted from it again. To our Arab neighbors, we extend, especially at this hour, the hand of peace. To members of the other religions, Christians and Muslims, I hereby promise faithfully that their full freedom and all their religious rights will be preserved. We did not come to Jerusalem to conquer the holy places of others.
Whatever one chooses to believe about how it happened, by all accounts, the victory of the Six-Day War was miraculous. For the Jews, the greatest miracle was, for the first time in 2,000 years, the nation of Israel once again controlled Judaism's most holy sites, the Temple Mount, and what was left of their temple at the western wall of Jerusalem.
The site of the temple is a place that remained sacred throughout Jewish history despite its destruction 2,000 years ago. And it has been a symbol of our past and a symbol of our future. And those who try to take it away understand that if you take away our past, you take away our future. We will not let that happen. And the return to Jerusalem, I think, is an eternal return. It's one that we have to work hard to protect and to assure not just for us, but for all future generations and for all people.
The Jews vowed to protect all holy places of Jerusalem. They demolished the walls, cleared the minefields, and removed the barbed wire barriers dividing Jerusalem. The freedom to worship was granted to everyone. Muslims were allowed to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Jews were allowed to pray at the Western Wall. Christians were allowed to pray at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Such religious freedom was unheard of and continues to this day. Freedom of religion in Israel reflects the precious freedom of religion of its greatest ally, the United States of America.
America and Israel are bound by fundamental values, common commitments, common worldviews. It's why Israel votes with the United States more often virtually than any other country, maybe Great Britain more. It is bound together by a commitment to democracy, justice, freedom, the rights of minorities, and all of the other commitments that both countries share.
Let me start from the beginning, and that's 1947. And here too, it's God, and it's God working through America. I want to make this point as clearly as I can say it. One of the most important aspects of the Jewish interpretation of the Bible, biblical events, is that God works through people.
Israel was born because God chose them. America is born because we chose God. Any nation can choose God.
Israel is the first line of defense for Western civilization. Israel is the canary in the coal mine, and if Israel goes down, we all go down.
As the United States abandons God, or if you will, becomes more and more secular, it abandons Israel more and more. And remember, because the moral compass gets broken as you leave God and the Judeo-Christian values of this country. So it all goes hand in hand. You abandon God within, you abandon Israel without, and you decline for both reasons.
We haven't seen these blood moons since 1967, and that was when Israel miraculously in the Six-Day War conquered its enemies. A similar situation to today. All of Israel's enemies gathering at its doorstep on every single border, breathing threats and pledging to wipe the Jewish people, not just Israel, but the Jewish people off the face of the earth. We have a similar situation today, and what do we have? We have, once again, that tetrad of blood moons.
This is the first time in history you have this tetrad occurring in a Shemitah year. It's never happened in a Shemitah year.
This year is the Shemitah year in Israel, and it coincides with within the tetrad astronomical occurrence. So the pastor said, well, that's even added proof that something dramatic is about to happen. God is going to demonstrate that he still runs the world.
What, if anything, are the heavens saying to us? Does understanding the past truly hold the secret to comprehending the future? Is something about to change, or has the changing already begun?
Already since the emergence of this current round, this current tetrad of blood moons, we've seen the world change. We've seen the emergence of ISIS, this dreaded Islamic State, conquering a vast amount of territory in the very heart of the Middle East. We've seen a vicious war between Israel and Hamas. We've seen Vladimir Putin, the Russian dictator, making moves against Ukraine and possibly beyond. We've seen the Ebola crisis. And we see, most importantly, I believe, in terms of the significance of these four blood moons, we see Iran continue to drive for a nuclear weapon, and even worse, we see the West, Europe, the United States, the UN, apparently willing to allow Iran to have nuclear weapons.
It's God saying to us, wake up, it's time to change.
Wake up from your slumber. Look around and you will see. Listen to the whisper, the knowledge that creation speaks. Our hope is alive and something's about to change. Open up our eyes, let us see into this mystery. Something's about to change. We feel it in our souls, and it is written in the sky. Something's about
Bible says very clearly in the book of Genesis, God says to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you.
By the way, that's provable. Those who have cursed the Jews have ended up cursed.
Where's the Babylonian Empire? It's gone. Where's the Grecian Empire? It's gone. Where's the Roman Empire? It's gone.
And I believe today's radical Islamic regimes, including the Iranian regime, will also end up in the dustbin of history for what they have done to the Jewish people.
I am as convinced as I am that this tie is red. That should the day that the United States begins to abandon Israel will be the beginning of the downfall, God forbid, of this great country, the United States of America.
I think it was Billy Graham who said that we should walk around with a Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other. And that's never been more apt than it is today.
Well, I think the main message that God is trying to communicate to the whole world is to get ready, to get right with Him. For that matter, we could die tomorrow. It doesn't matter about the blood moon. You know, we could die tomorrow, and we need to be ready.
I'm asked every so often, what do I think the most important verse in the Bible is? And for years, I have made the case, it is Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Because if you don't accept that, don't bother reading the rest. It's all predicated on that.
The fact that there is a God who's in total control is the most hopeful message that you can hear today on planet Earth, and it's evidenced in the 4 blood moons.
There's threats within the Christian world to abandon its Judeo roots, and there are threats within the Jewish world to mistrust the Christian and to work for the eventual eradication of the Christian and Jewish or the Judeo-Christian essence of America. So there's like a civil war in both religions that people must be aware of. But so you have two things. You have the centripetal force or centrifugal force pulling Christians and Jews apart, and you have the other force bringing Jews and Christians together.
I would like to say to Christians and Jews that we are spiritual brothers because we both come from the seed of Abraham spiritually. And the Bible goes to great lengths to say that Abraham is the father of all who believe. Listen to that very closely. If a line has to be drawn, draw it around both Christians and Jews, because our spiritual roots are one and the same.
The Christians picked up the ball when we were no longer a nation capable of doing it, when we could only do everything we could to worry about survival. We couldn't afford to worry about redemption. Our daughter religion, the Christians, spread the notions of commandment and redemption to the world.
I think that Israel is in a difficult position today because Israel is the target of the rage of Islam, the rage of the Muslim world. And I don't mean every Muslim, but I'm talking about Islamic radicalism has focused its rage on Israel.
The Jews and the Christians who believe in a God of love, a God of morality, and a God of peace, against extremist Islam that believes in a God of power and jihad, a world war of power that will ultimately bring Islamic domination over the world. This is a religious war. And our friendship means we have to band together. The stars may very well tell us that this is the time for great things to happen. We have to make them happen.
With the lessons we've learned from history, must we only guess at what the future holds? Perhaps there are logical reasons to consider history, science, the words of the Talmud, and the Bible as we seek to understand the past and interpret the signs that may portend our future. Perhaps we need to ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. Are these astronomical occurrences indeed signs of the heavens? And if they are, should we not begin to wonder who we really are and where we fit in the grand scheme of the universe, and decide the things that matter most here on our precious planet Earth? What does the future hold for mankind? What does the future hold for each of us? And perhaps the most important question of all, what are we going to do about it? Whatever the future holds, we must wonder if we are ready, right with the world, our fellow men, and the God who gave us life.
I think we're living in fateful times. I think the stars, the moon, the sun may well be telling us that the situation is ripe for redemption, and I think it is. But ultimately, that won't be determined by the stars or the moon. Ultimately, I think that will be determined by human action. And us, Christians and Jews, coming together, returning our errant brother, and living in a world of a God of love and morality and peace.
Don't weep no more. Gabriel standing up to sound his horn. Don't weep no more. I see the coming of the Lord. Like a thief at night, the Lord will come, and he'll set right all the wrong been done. The lonely widow, the orphan child will find their rest in a little while. Oh, now blessed are the meek. Oh, for you get what you see. Don't weep no more. Gabriel standing up to sound his horn. Don't weep no more. I see the coming of the Lord on a white horse with a sharp sword. I see the coming of the Lord with a lion's roar. Open heaven's door. I see the coming of the Lord. Don't weep no more. Gabriel standing up to sound his horn. Don't weep no more. I see the coming of the Lord. Like a thief at night, the Lord will come, and he'll set right all the wrong men done. I see the coming of the Lord. You're given a sight from the beginning of time. A God who once came is coming